Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Stephen Reed. I'm the Deputy Communications Director for the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center at NYU School of Law. Let's get the obvious out of the way. It's safe to say I'm not the person you expected to be kicking off this press conference. I will assume you all know what I'm alluding to, but if you don't, a quick Google search should get you up to speed. With that said, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone, especially the State Attorneys General, who have so generously taken the time to join us for the release of our new report, Full Court Press, How State Attorneys General Guarded Against the Trump Administration's Anti-Regulatory Agenda. This report highlights a selection of the now nearly 500 actions that State Attorneys General have taken over the last 4 years, as documented in the State Impact Center's Attorney General Actions database. These actions, ranging from op-eds and letters to Congress to rulemaking comments, amicus briefs, and yes, more than a few lawsuits, have collectively provided a crucial bulwark against the Trump administration's so-called energy dominance agenda and the threat that it posed to our climate, our environment, and communities across America, particularly the most vulnerable among us. Many of these actions were led by the attorneys general who are here with us today: Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum, Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosch, and Connecticut Attorney General William Tong. I think I can safely speak for all of us in saying that we are relieved that fresh players from an experienced team will soon be taking over at the helm of key federal agencies, equipped with the tools to put our country back on a sound climate, clean energy, and environmental track. But before the buzzer sounds on this challenging quarter at precisely noon Eastern next Wednesday, let's take the time to hear from 4 attorneys general who have been at the forefront of this tireless effort to defend critical environmental protections over the last 4 years. And as we hear from the attorneys general, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for that introduction, for having us here today. I want to thank Dave Hayes. I mean, David Hayes has been an amazing leader, and the State Impact Center has just done terrific work. And once again, doing terrific work as evidenced by this new report. I'll begin by saying that over the past 4 years, it's been the center's innovation and its passionate defense of clean energy and our environmental laws and policies, the leadership of the center that has really made such an incredible impact on the work that we do as state attorneys general. And speaking of state AGs, I want to thank my colleagues, Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum, Attorney General Brian Frosch, and Attorney General William Tong, who've been just incredible partners in this fight to protect our climate and our communities from a Trump administration that's been hell-bent on undermining public health for polluters' benefits and attacking science and the rule of law for their own gain. Let me just say before I begin, I like the title of this report. I used to play a little basketball myself, and so you'll have to excuse all the puns I'm going to drop in, but needless to say that in keeping with the theme of this report, and as Stephen pointed out, our role over the last 4 years has been to prevent opponents of climate action from making it down the court and scoring points. Because when they score points against climate action, the public and the planet lose. We all lose. Putting up a strong defense has always been the focus of our work during this reckless administration. That work became even more important during the COVID pandemic, of course. The public crisis that's still unfolding has made painfully clear just how interconnected our environmental, public health, and racial justice issues truly are. Now, back in May, my office released a report on the environmental factors that compound the public health crisis's disparate impact on communities of color in Massachusetts. Families across our state have been devastated by this pandemic, of course, but none have been hit harder than our immigrant, Black and brown and low-income communities, where there's been a public health crisis for decades. The pandemic reaffirmed why what we do, building our clean energy economy and the jobs it brings, and protecting our clean air and public health is so critical. Now, instead of recognizing and responding to these interconnected crises, with a sense of duty and urgency. The Trump administration has instead used the pandemic as an excuse to roll back environmental regulations, putting the public at even further risk. We raised the alarm. We took action against Trump's EPA whenever it sought to give polluting industries a free pass. And we're getting into the public game as well and making sure that we bring the public, not just actions in court, but in the court of public opinion, that we bring people along. That's why we've held teach-ins and symposiums on the fundamentals of energy markets, and we've helped amplify the voices of advocates and young people in our state and across this country who are playing such a critical role in protecting our planet and public health by demanding change. It's crucial that we have an engaged and informed public so that that public can be there to have an active role in shaping our clean energy future. So we're fighting back, we're joining forces, and as this report shows, and we are very proud of, we are winning. The Trump administration has spent the last 4 years doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry, from rolling back limits on greenhouse gas emissions to undermining our clean car standards to opening up protected areas to oil and gas drilling. But our team, our powerful team of state AGs, has taken them to court over and over and over again, and we've successfully defended implementing money-saving energy efficiency standards. We've defended successfully regulating methane emissions, protecting workers and first responders from chemical explosions, preventing a bailout for coal and nuclear power plants, controlling harmful ozone pollution, and more. We never expected that we'd have to go to court to take the Trump administration on so many times, but it became clear pretty early on that they weren't going to do their job. They weren't going to enforce the laws, and we had to step in. And as we highlighted in a report from my office in October, Massachusetts has taken over 200 actions to challenge the Trump administration's unlawful behavior. And my colleagues have taken so many actions over this time. It's required a collective effort from states across this country. Look, it's up to all of us, state attorneys general, the new Biden-Harris administration, activists, organizers, and the broader public to make every second count as we near the end of this presidency and move forward. In closing, we know that the president and the climate change deniers and coal lobbyists he put in charge at EPA aren't leaving quietly. In fact, on their way out the door, they're still trying to push through rules that will make it harder for President-elect Biden's EPA to protect the environment and public health. They're pushing forward with oil and gas leasing in the Arctic and are rolling back money-saving energy efficiency standards. But we've been there, and we're going to be there to continue to fight that right up until the end. And we look forward to working with a new administration that actually believes in science, believes in clean energy, and believes fundamentally and most importantly in protecting the health and the welfare of our people and our planet. I'd now like to turn it over to my good friend, Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum.
Thank you, AG Healy. It is such an honor to get to work with this amazing group of state attorneys general. And so thank you all for being here with us this morning. You know, AGs across the country have been unexpectedly busy this week, as have many others, but I wanted to make sure that even in all the chaos, we do not overlook the work that AGs are doing across the country, including the West Coast, where it's still morning here, for the environment. So again, thank you all for being here. And specifically, I also want to thank David Hayes, who of course is not here for a very good reason this morning due to his new job, but his leadership of the State Impact Center has been amazing. And Stephen, thank you so much. You and your team have just been invaluable partners in our work to hold the line against the Trump administration's deregulatory efforts these entire 4 years from day one. And so while my exact title may be Oregon Attorney General, I don't actually believe that's the most important title I have. I'll tell you, ranking down the list not very far is another title I have, and that is on this t-shirt here that I proudly wear, and it says Mama Bear, okay? And the reason it says that is you don't ever want to get between a mama bear and her cubs, right? We will move heaven and earth for them. And that's what I thought about when Donald Trump was elected president. In the face of this, how can we still work to leave behind a better future for all of our children and grandchildren across Oregon and across the country? So since the very beginning, 4 years ago, we have collectively, as you've heard, and as you'll see in our report, and this is an updated report, we've been, the Impact Center has been preparing these reports over the course of these 4 years. They are very impressive, and you can actually look up each state. So if you just want to see what we've done in Oregon or Maryland or Connecticut or wherever, Massachusetts, it's very easy to do that. We have collectively taken hundreds of actions to prevent this administration's dangerous deregulatory agenda from taking hold. And we've, for the most part, been very successful. By last count, I think it's around 500 individual actions to date, and Oregon, little Oregon, has been involved in well over 200 of those. In fact, this coalition of state attorneys general have spent the last 4 years defending and promoting our nation's most fundamental environmental laws, pollution and chemical regulations, and climate protections. This has come in the form of rulemaking comments, letters to heads of federal agencies, amicus briefs in federal court, as well as multi-state litigation. So each of these actions could fit into one or more of those categories. And much of this success is captured in the full court press report. A great example, I just want to give a couple of examples of some of the work that I'm particularly proud of that Oregon has been involved in. And usually my other West Coast partners are involved. We're kind of attached at the hip out here. So if there's an issue of the environment in California, no doubt Oregon and Washington and other Western states are going to be, filing the same actions, co-signing together. A great example of building a regional coalition was our successful defense of the state's low carbon fuel standards, which the Trump administration targeted. In Oregon, like our neighbor to the south, we have a low carbon fuel standard in place to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases and harmful conventional pollutants from our transportation system. The scientific and medical communities are in unanimous agreement on this. The combustion of fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases that are rapidly altering our climate on a global scale, as well as nitrous and sulfur oxides, particulate matter, and other pollutants that are harming our health on a regional and local scale. And yes, this is about environmental justice because we know which communities are most affected. The fossil fuel industry decided to attack not just Oregon's low carbon fuel standards, but also California's. We held the line in defense of these forward-looking policies, and the courts have rejected their baseless challenges. The fossil fuel industry even tried to take the issue to the Supreme Court, but together we defeated that push as well. Briefly on cap and trade, more than a dozen of us joined together again when the Trump administration took aim at California's cap and trade agreement with the Canadian province of Quebec. My office led a group of attorneys general supporting California in its defense against the federal administration's far-fetched attack. And on this too, we succeeded. The court saw right through the administration's claims and rejected them outright. So as we turn to the future with a new administration in charge, I think we are all looking forward to having a partner again at the federal level. We will have to make up for lost time and lost ground, but we cannot allow that to discourage us. We need to meet this challenge head on with equal parts determination and optimism. The communities that we represent and our grandchildren in particular deserve nothing less. So I'm confident that with the new day dawning next week, we can begin to do just that. So thank you again. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Attorney General Brian Frosh.
Thank you very much, Ellen and Maura and William. It's great to be here with the three of you this afternoon. I guess it's still this morning in Oregon, but I also want to say thanks, as my colleagues have, to David Hayes and to the State Impact Center. They've provided invaluable support, counsel, and focus to the effort to protect our water, our air, and our climate from the predations of the Trump administration. Indeed, you know, the Trump administration has spent the last 4 years proving the proposition that was first stated by Harry Truman in 1948. And President Truman said, "Selfish men have always tried to skim the cream of our natural resources to satisfy their own greed, and their instrument has been the Republican Party." I hope that Maura and Ellen will forgive me from not rephrasing President Truman to include women. The Trump administration's zeal to prop up the fossil fuel industries caused them to embark upon a climate destruction program. They refused to enforce and attempted to overturn dozens of rules that protect our climate, and not incidentally, our air and water. They've tried to lift pollution caps on cars, trucks, industries, utilities, landfills, oil drilling. They have overridden the findings of scientists. They've ignored the opinions of experts. They made stuff up to support their desired outcomes. They're trying to put a rule in place even now that would restrict the ability of EPA to consider scientific evidence, putting a thumb on the scale against regulation. And we're going to sue them again, even at the 11th hour, even as Donald Trump is on his way out the door. State AGs have been the firewall against these illegal actions. And as I said, I'm proud to join the ones who are on this call, but also folks like AG Javier Becerra and AG Tish James and many, many others, all of whom have joined together to stop this attack on our environment. The battles that we've fought have national and global consequences, but they also impact our constituents right where they live. And I'll just mention two examples that I find inexplicable and appalling. The first is the chemical accident safety rule. It requires industries who store or manufacture toxic chemicals to let their neighbors know what they've got, to let firefighters, police, other first responders know so that when there's a spill or a fire, they know what they're dealing with. EPA has tried repeatedly to overturn that Obama era rule, and we're still fighting them on that.
Yes, I will. Thank you. Yeah, I'll come up there.
Second, Marylanders, as many of you probably know, cherish the Chesapeake Bay. And Trump's proposal to commence offshore drilling and the seismic testing that is attendant to it were an immediate threat to its health. Offshore drilling is dangerous in general. It's destructive. It's unnecessary. And the Trump administration proposed offshore drilling right in the middle of fragile ecosystems like the Arctic and like the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And you have to know that even routine drilling, even the routine activity attendant to it, causes leaks that are hazardous. There's oil in the water all the time, whether there's a major spill or not. And you should know as well that crabs, the keystone species of the Chesapeake Bay, migrate down to the mouth of the bay in order to spawn. And the spawn rise up to the top quarter inch of the water column, precisely the place where spilled petroleum accumulates. So you could lose the young of the year in one fell swoop if you have a minor oil spill somewhere around the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The routine and the catastrophic spills threaten the bay. And we were very proud to have been able to stop the plans for drilling on the East Coast with our lawsuit that attacked the seismic testing that formed the foundation of the administration's attempt to lease out the continental shelf for oil drilling. I'm very glad to see the Trump administration leaving and leaving very shortly. But much work remains to be done. We have to clean up all of the actions that they have taken over the past 4 years. And I can assure you that our group of attorneys general is going to continue to fight to protect our environment. With that, it's a great pleasure for me to turn the mic over to the great Attorney General from the great state of Connecticut. It's protector of the people, the shores, and the natural resources of Connecticut, William Tom.
Thank you, General Frosch. And the fish, I should note, because the Chesapeake Bay is where much of the eastern seaboard's striped bass population winters, and they spend a lot of time down in your waters, and then make their way up all the way up to A.G. Healy's backyard and Cape Cod and northward. And that is a population that is heavily under pressure and would have been very severely impacted by seismic testing and drilling. So thank you so much for your leadership there. Thank you, General Healy, General Rosenblum, Stephen, and David in the State Impact Center. You've done so much and have made an incredible impact on me in just my short 2 years in office. The State Impact Center has inspired me and Connecticut through its climate work to take its own action, culminating in my lawsuit against ExxonMobil announced last year to hold them accountable for their role in climate change and deceiving the American people about the effects of climate change and fossil fuels. Let me just say also that I don't have a jump shot. I am terrible at basketball, and I am not a mama bear. And so I think the best I can bring to this is that I happen to be a lawyer like the other AGs. And I guess that's where I'll start. You know, thinking a lot about our work here and our work in particular against the Trump administration. But, you know, what we're doing here is really in many ways vindicating core constitutional principles. You know, the environment and our collective action on the environment and protecting the climate is in large part why we have a federal government, because the federal government is there to help us accomplish the things as states that we cannot effectively do by ourselves, right? And we as states joined in a federation delegate limited powers, sorry to nerd out here, but we delegate our limited powers to the federal government so that the federal government acting through the EPA, for example, or the cross-state air pollution rule, right? Or the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, that the federal government can step forward and confront the challenges to our individual states that we don't have the resources to confront entirely on our own, but that we need the help of our sister states in confronting, and that we need the federal government and its vast resources to address. And that's where the federal government can be most effective. This is an area where Connecticut is particularly impacted. And I made reference to the cross-state air pollution rule. Connecticut and Massachusetts and other states in our region, we're packed so tightly together here in New England. Connecticut sits at the end of America's tailpipe, literally, because of the jet stream and because of the way the wind blows. If you shoot emissions in the air in other states that are upwind and west of Connecticut, they literally travel downwind into Connecticut, and they make Connecticut's air less clean than it should be. And frankly, despite the fact that Connecticut has a lot of resources and is a prosperous state on a relative basis, our air and our water is not as clean as it should be. And part of that is because of downwind air pollution that impacts clean air and clean water. And that's why for a long time, The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and other related rules like the cross-state air pollution rule have required other states that are upwind of Connecticut to control or reduce their emissions so that those emissions in that particular matter doesn't blow downwind through the tailpipe into Connecticut and affect all of us, and in particular, vulnerable communities, urban communities that are least well equipped to address those threats to their life, safety, and security. Unfortunately, under the Trump administration, we've seen an aggressive effort and a systematic effort to dismantle these basic protections, including something known as the Good Neighbor Rule, which requires these states upwind of Connecticut to set standards and put procedures in place to ensure that they do everything they can to be a good neighbor and not blow emissions downwind into Connecticut. And we've been in court time and time again. We've been successful in suing the Trump administration to make sure that they enforce the cross-state air pollution rule and the good neighbor rules to protect states like Connecticut, because we're unable to do it entirely on our own. And that's why we need the federal government in this new administration, the Biden-Harris administration, to step up again and do its constitutionally mandated job of protecting all of the states from the threat of air pollution, and to enforce the rules that were put in place to protect all of us and to make sure that the air we breathe and the water we drink is clean. And with that, let me turn it back over to Stephen. Thank you again for having us.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks for those remarks. I think you've all said in one way or another that although these are federal and national issues, and much of the conversation revolves around, you know, a coalition of states and an action vis-a-vis the federal government, these cases, these regulations, they all have very real impacts on the ground. And so I wonder if we could bring this down to earth a little bit. You've all done this in one way or another, but is there a specific experience with a community in your state or a conversation with a constituent that for you on a personal level has really kind of brought home the importance of these issues that we're talking about here today and that are described in the full court press report? And maybe we can start with Attorney General Tong and work backwards.
So we referenced before the crabs and then the striped bass. And let me say, just speaking for Connecticut, we depend so much on Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean. And our economy is tied to it and inextricably tied to it. And our fisheries depend on a healthy Long Island Sound. It's the commercial fishery. It is, Connecticut is the site of one of the world's largest clam fisheries, oyster fisheries, and was until around 2000, the second largest lobster fishery in the world, next to the state of Maine. And then, unbelievably, the entire industry disappeared overnight. The die-off in 1 year was estimated to be 12 million lobsters. And now there's barely any industry left. And that was due, we think, entirely to changes in the climate, to water temperature, to the clarity and cleanliness of the water. And this isn't just about saving animals, right? This is about whole communities and industries and states that depend on our environment for our lifeblood. And so that touches us every day here in Connecticut.
General Frosch.
Oh, okay. I have many experiences that are very similar to A.G. Tong's. I was in the Maryland General Assembly for quite a long time. And I was chairman of the Environment Subcommittee for 8 years in the Senate. And we have people, as William said, whose lives depend upon the health of the Chesapeake Bay. they're the fishermen, and many of the folks who take tour boats out, fishing boats out for recreational fishing and crabbing and stuff like that. But we also have very low-lying country all over our state. The Chesapeake Bay runs right down through the middle of Maryland, and you're seeing the land disappear. It's unmistakably a cause of global warming, and people come in for and talk about the impact that it has on them. There's saltwater intrusion in their wells. They can't drink the water anymore. Their farmland is disappearing, and it's becoming salty from the expansion, the rise of the bay levels and the sea levels that are right next to it. And I've been through hours of testimony in committee where folks have come in who are literally on oxygen, who have trouble breathing the air because we are so polluted, and we suffer from the same problems that New England suffers from. We receive the air from the Midwest, and it pollutes our air in Maryland, despite the fact that we've taken heroic measures to clean up the air that is within our control. We've put very tight controls on power plants, on industries, for air pollution and water pollution. And we've adopted, in fact, I think we were one of the first states to adopt the California vehicle emission standards for our citizens. And every time they've raised them, Maryland has followed suit. I was the sponsor of most of those efforts. But notwithstanding that, we have a national and I suppose international problem with air pollution. And of course, with the emission of climate changing gases. So it affects people in their daily lives. It affects their health, it affects their property, and it's an existential threat to every single one of us, not only in the United States of America, but around the world. And the Trump administration has just put the car in reverse and is going backwards as fast as it possibly can.
Let me add my 2 cents here. If you haven't been to Oregon, please come. You will see what a beautiful state we have, as my colleagues' states are as well, but we're very proud of our mountains and our ocean, our clean water. We have the best tasting water, I think, in the world, frankly. And but we have serious air pollution problems, especially recently. And that might surprise you, but just as an example, Oregonians love their wood burning stoves. Wood burning stoves are a huge problem. They must be regulated. And believe it or not, there's been a pushback for regulating a wood burning stove, which, is certainly delightful, but not when it's affecting our health, which it does. Another example of air pollution, Oregon was ranked this past fall, early September. You may recall what was going on here after, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of the protests, in the midst of, everything else. We had the worst wildfires imaginable right here in our state, coming even close to Portland. We almost had to evacuate our largest city. So what was incredible was that Oregon was on the map as the worst air pollution in the world. Cities in Oregon had the worst air pollution in the world, not just in the United States, not just in this country, but in the world. Why was that? Well, you could say we had really bad wildfires. Obviously, smoke is what causes that pollution, but we have to look behind the causes of the wildfires. And the causes of the wildfires go right back to why we're here today, to making sure that we are addressing the issues of climate in all regards, globally and locally, because our precious Oregon, we have to be able to breathe the air and we were unable to go outdoors. We had to stay indoors for COVID. We couldn't even go outside to breathe the air while we were here for another health reason, required to stay home. So it was a very, very bad situation. Thankfully, that has improved, but we must keep our eye on that ball. And then finally, I just want to mention we share a river with the state of Washington. We share the Columbia River, and the Columbia River looks great, just like the oceans look great until you start looking underneath. And we are very, very concerned about the potential for chemical pollution by the Hanford nuclear plant. We are working closely with the state of Washington to make sure that we protect our river.
Yeah, and I'll just say this is about people. Environmental justice is about civil rights, is about fundamentally taking care of people. I mean, the example for me I'll point to is that we have people who are living in some of our cities, communities right now that have high concentrations of pollution. They're places where, you've got a lot of trucks and buses idling. You've got some manufacturing and factories. You've got no existing polluters in those communities. And of course, those communities contain a number of disproportionately low income people, disproportionately Black and brown communities. And the report that we put out this summer showed, we received complaints, and it tracked air pollution and air quality to poor outcomes with respect to COVID. It actually tracked. The worse the pollution was, you saw the higher the COVID rates in those places. And of course, that mapped with the fact that you were talking about predominantly Black and brown communities. And so, the work we do, there's a reason we sue ExxonMobil, right? There's a reason that we go out there and we enforce all these laws as we have had to do in the face of abdication by DOJ. But it's about protecting the health and the well-being of our communities, because the science shows that this all impacts public health. And that's just one example that stays with me when I think about the work that we do and that we must do going forward.
Thank you all for sharing those. I think we'll leave it there for now. As the attorneys general have mentioned, things have not quieted down as the end of the Trump administration approaches. If anything, the Trump administration has accelerated its efforts to ram through deregulatory actions that threaten public health and the environment. So we won't keep them with us any longer, but thank you all for joining us. And for those waiting, the press release with the report will be landing in inboxes shortly. You can also find it on the State Impact Center's website and on Twitter. Definitely follow us on Twitter. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Attorney General Healy, Attorney General Tong, Attorney General Frosch, and Attorney General Rosenblum. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Stephen. Be well, everyone.